Hello, this is Danielle Yawowiecka with the BBC News. The UN Special Envoy for Myanmar says the country is at real risk of a large-scale civil war. Christina Schraner Burgener warned the UN General Assembly that the opportunity to reverse February's military coup was narrowing. She said Myanmar was in a critical situation.
We have an alarming situation on the ground for all civilian people because the health system collapsed completely and food security is also in danger. We expect, if the situation continues like that we have next year around the half of the population will live under the poverty line.
Earlier, the Assembly passed a resolution condemning Myanmar's military government and calling for member states to stop providing arms to the country. The non-binding resolution also calls for the release of political detainees and an end to violence against peaceful protesters. Roman Catholic bishops in the US have made a first move towards denying Holy Communion to politicians like President Biden, who support abortion rights. With more, here's David Willis.
Catholic bishops in the US at their spring assembly voted in favour of drafting a teaching document that would address the question of whether Catholic politicians in this country should be eligible to receive communion if they support policies that conflict with those of the Church. Now, ultimately, this teaching document will only serve as guidance. It will still be up to individual bishops to decide who receives communion in their diocese, but it could amount to a considerable rebuke for the nation's second Catholic president.
The Palestinian Authority has cancelled a deal under which Israel was to give it at least 1 million coronavirus vaccines. Earlier, Israel said it didn't need an ageing stock of jabs at the moment. In return, the Palestinians were to give Israel a similar number of vaccines later in the year. But Palestinian officials said the first batch was even nearer its expiry date than expected. Ibrahim Melhem is a spokesman for the Palestinian Authority Health Ministry.
After an examination by Health Ministry staff of the first Pfizer vaccine shipment that was received today from Israel, it was found that they did not meet the specifications in the agreement. The Prime Minister instructed the Health Minister to cancel the vaccine exchange agreement with Israel and to return today's shipment.
Polls have closed in Iran's presidential election after voting was extended to midnight local time. The winner will succeed Hassan Rouhani, who's not allowed to serve for a third term. In a highly controlled contest, most reformist candidates were barred from standing. Almost all those allowed to run were regarded as hardliners, and the conservative cleric Ibrahim Raisi is expected to win. BBC World News. Peru's interim president, Francisco Sagasti, has criticised a group of retired members of the armed forces who've called for military intervention against the left-wing presidential candidate Pedro Castillo. He won most votes in the election held earlier this month, but a winner hasn't been declared because his far-right opponent, Keiko Fujimori, blamed her narrow defeat on unsubstantiated claims of widespread fraud and has asked for thousands of votes to be annulled. A huge manhunt is underway on the outskirts of the Brazilian capital after the brutal killing of a family of 4 by a convicted criminal. More than 200 police have been involved in the operation for the past 10 days. Our America's editor Leonardo Rocha has the story.
The man accused of the crimes, Lázaro Barbosa, has been described as a cold killer by his own father and by survivors of previous attacks. As a fugitive, he has shot at and injured police officers, looted properties and assaulted those who got in his way. The manhunt has gripped Brazil and has created a climate of fear in the region. There have been many sightings of the man in the past 10 days, but he always seems to be one step ahead of the police. Local residents say he's an experienced hunter who was brought up in the region and therefore knows the local woods better than anyone else.
Nearly 9,000 people in the Central African Republic are without a home after their camp was destroyed by a fire. The aid agency Médecins Sans Frontières said many had taken refuge in a mosque compound in the town of Bambari, but the conditions there were terrible. At the Copa America football tournament in Brazil, Argentina have beaten Uruguay 1-0 in the biggest match of the day. Guido Rodriguez scored his first ever goal for Argentina in the battle between the two nations that have won the Copa America the most times. In the other match, Chile beat Bolivia 1-0 to join Argentina at the top of the group. BBC News.